All right, so we will begin then. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the new to today's seminar in the RRI Quantum Science and Technology Seminar Series. Today it gives me further pleasure in introducing our speaker for today, Professor Apurva Patel. So first I'll give the little formal introduction and then I will say a few words on Apurva. So Apurva Patel is a professor at the Center for High Energy Physics at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He obtained his MSc in physics from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and his PhD in physics from the California Institute of Technology, USA. He has extensively worked on lattice gauge theory investigations of quantum chromodynamics. He's also notable for his work on quantum algorithms and the application of information theory concepts to understand the structure of genetic languages. So it is quite clear that Apurva has actually a wide range of experience in different areas of physics and of course, specifically quantum physics. It's very difficult to come across someone with that breadth, that kind of breadth. And of course, if you interact with Apurva, which I've been doing for, I think, more than a decade now, he has always come across to me as a man of few words. In fact, he is known for speaking just optimally, never beyond the point. And that is a quality that I really personally appreciate, So, and it's of course then great that, he's actually going to give us a seminar today where he has to speak more than a few words, Apurva. So welcome. And one thing that Apurva told me before is that, people can please raise their hands and ask questions during the seminar. It need not all end till the end of the seminar, like other times. So please feel free to informally interact with Apurva during the seminar. Okay, so with that, on to you, Apurva.
Yeah, thank you, Urvashi, for inviting me to give this talk. It's a very simple thing which we did a couple of years back. And the plan was to basically make something straightforward, but which is also useful to students and to play around with in testing very simple ideas of quantum computation. Given the fact that the hardware of quantum computation is still years away, we can learn several things using just a simulator. So the project was done with a group of undergraduate students. So there is nothing complicated in it, except that we have to pick a properly defined problem, and the names of all the students are listed here. And after that, the code was handed over. It was already an open source library, and then the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology took it up. They gave it to CDAC to make a nice user interface. So you can move around and click on various buttons and draw some nice pictures and all things like that. And it is now publicly available on national facility, and the address of it is just qctoolkit.in if you want to try out. And of course, this was just a first step. There are many ways in which it can be improved, and well, we will do some of them. So let me start with a basic introduction to what simulators are and what they do. So these days, simulators are a shortcut before making complex systems and devices. We have enough computers with enough capabilities. So instead of using the real hardware, you make a model and just program the various operations inside it. The advantage is that in this program, there are many parameters. They can be tuned and optimized, and that helps in designing a real system. So not just a quantum system, such tools are available and widely used in all kind of sophisticated machinery, whether it is a car, or whether it is an aeroplane, or whether it is other kind of industry, this particularly the computer industry itself. And that's a nice thing to explore. Actually, there is a little joke that you make a fast computer, what do you use it for? And the answer is you use it for designing even a faster computer. The advantage which we want to build in this simulator is that we want it to be sensitive to various kind of errors. The reason being that physical systems are never perfect. They will have noise and fluctuations, and we want to be able to control that. And to control that, we have to introduce various parameters in the model and figure out what are the points which are optimized or stabilized by certain kind of design features. And all kind of criteria are there for checking whether you've done the right thing. They go under the name of verification and validation. Verification just means that whatever input specifications you provided, they are correctly implemented or not. And validation means that the target or the final result, does it have the desired performance? So there's a little difference in the interpretation of these two words. The other purpose is, of course, to use these systems as educational and research aids. We can put in various kind of physical systems and physical phenomena into the simulators, study their variations, and explore new possibilities. So that was our aim in making up the simulator. The next step is actually to take it forward, and that is to use this simulator, or rather develop it further so that it can be used as a software design platform. This kind of computer-aided design tools are quite commonplace in lots of places, and they actually save a lot of work before making up the real hardware system. What we want to put in this design tool are all kind of environmental interactions and disturbances that we can think of. We should be able to vary the material properties, geometry, and connectivity of various components which go in, and also take advantage of large-scale simulation to get an idea of the overall error probabilities. The reason being that the naive estimates of errors which we learn in all these elementary courses on information theory, they are generally too pessimistic. What happens in a real system, that errors also decay. And so the actual error for a system many times is less than what the theoretical bounds give. And if such a possibility exists, then we want to take advantage of it also, because the main purpose of a simulator is to have a design where all the errors are below a certain threshold, the tolerance level which you can specify, and we want to get there without too many trial and error kind of effort.
Apurva, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm a little confused. So you say that the naive estimates of error are often pessimistic. This is, in fact, my perception was that naive estimates of errors are usually optimistic. Like, they are, I mean, you're saying that the estimates of error are actually lower than what you would expect in a real system.
yeah,
So, I mean, so by that you mean that when you take into account the experimental imperfections, you will get a higher error. Is that what you're saying? Or?
no. In
No.
a real experimental system,
Huh.
which is also simulated, the error will be smaller than the bounds which are produced theoretically. For example, one condition often used is a triangle inequality. So you said that the total error is less than the sum of the absolute values of all the errors. This is correct, but it is too pessimistic, because the errors not necessarily all add up. They will cancel also sometimes, and sometimes they will decay as well in the process of evolution. So that is the reason the errors turn out to be actually smaller. The other thing which happens in many body systems is the phenomenon of localization. This is a consequence of a disorder, and in some sense connected with the error, but the disorder prevents the error from propagating. And so the errors remain localized in certain part of systems, at least to some extent, and they don't propagate to other components and disturb their values.
So sorry, Apurva, what you mean is that you can actually overestimate errors sometimes by just blindly, modeling them from theory perspective. If you do not take into account, the fact that these errors, sometimes there could be overcounting and so on also happening. So these are things you can avoid by digging deeper. That is the message, right?
Yeah, that is the message.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
So, okay, now let me move to the specifics of the simulator which we designed. We wanted a general purpose quantum evolution, what is called in theory as a CPTP, completely positive trace preserving map. And that is described in the language of density matrices. You cannot use the vector in a Hilbert space description to consider the most general quantum evolution. And there are various sources of errors which we could think of going from the input to the output. So the input state many times just initialized as a all zero register is actually not all zeros. There are fluctuations mostly because of thermal effects. So zero, if it's labeled as a ground state, there is little bit of contamination from the excited state. Then the logic gates, which now act on these quantum registers, they are certain kind of instructions, but the quantum instructions are not discrete. They are implemented as some rotation angle, which are decided by length of some external field pulses, And these are not going to be perfect either. So there will be some variations in the transformation, the unitary transformations that are implemented, which can be described as uncertainty in the rotation angles, for example. Then even if you are not doing anything, not applying any instructions, while the data is still sitting in register or memory, it undergoes spontaneous processes, mostly because the environment is always going to interact with the system. So there are decays of the excited states, and there is decoherence, which is scattering of various degrees of freedom due to environmental interaction. And this happens all the time in the background, whether you are doing anything or not. And finally, the measurement itself is not perfect. There will be some loss of the signal, which often can be modeled as depolarization. So instead of getting a perfect result, you get some admixture of unwanted states also while performing the projection operators for measurement. So we wanted to take into all these things account. What is left for future is you can put in extra degrees of freedom, which will control the connectivity between qubits and what are the elementary logic gates that can be put into the device. This vary from one kind of real hardware to another kind of hardware. The elementary gates for some system may be convenient in one particular framework. Another system may have another framework. The connectivity can be different, and we have to make choices. What we did was again go by the standard textbook kind of description and included certain universal gates, but the set can be always be easily expanded and modified depending on the hardware that you want to simulate. And what we can imagine in such a situation is that you can compare different hardwares also in terms of their efficiency by changing the set of elementary gates or the connectivity between qubits and see which kind of processor will perform better than its competitors. So we did all those things, and I will give it step-by-step description in what follows. But let me give the summary first. We chose to build our simulator on IBM's open source Qiskit platform. And that was a choice of convenience. This was already readily available. It was already popular in various fora. And we could easily write codes in a high-level language, which happens to be Python in this particular case. And we did that, and the whole code for the simulator is put in this public access GitHub repository. And it has some user guide as well, though user guide probably needs a lot of improvement and additions of toy model kind of programs, which will help the students. The important point for the development was to choose a convenient basis for describing the density matrix. And we chose to work in the Pauli basis, which is a tensor product of the Pauli matrices, where sigma 0 we identified with the identity matrix and expanded the tensor product to cover n qubit register. This was chosen to make our coding simple, but it also turns out that it has many other advantages. I will come back to that later. But at this level, you can easily see that the density matrix can be expanded in this particular basis, where the coefficients, which are called A with subscript I, they are all real. And the important consequence of that is that when we simulate this density matrix in this particular basis, all the complex number algebra is eliminated from the code. The code only has real numbers. And that makes it very easy to do linear algebra using many standard software packages which are available. Doing linear algebra with complex number is a little more complicated. So we don't use the representation of a density matrix, which is in the textbook, which is 2 raised to n times 2 raised to n complex matrix. We use the description where there are 4 raised to n real numbers. After that, one can also say something about what is the price that we have paid in generating the density matrix simulator, that you can compare it with the simulator which is written in the state vector language. And most of the simulators which are available publicly are written in this state vector language. They have 2 raised to n complex coefficients. And we have now 4 raised to n real coefficients. So the number that we have to keep in memory has become squared of. And the obvious drawback is that if you want to simulate a quantum system with some given fixed resources in the state vector language, if you can simulate n qubits, in the density matrix language, you can simulate n by 2 qubits, half the number. And that is the penalty for using the density matrix framework, but it is something which we cannot escape if you want to include all kinds of errors, because there is no way the errors can be included in the state vector formalism, where certain errors can be, but not all possible errors. There is one minor advantage present, that when you run this density matrix simulator, it gives the complete density matrix output, which is a tomograph. All the coefficients are available at the end. So you don't have to actually run this simulator many times and average quantities over many runs to get the expectation values. The tomography is already done. So the state vector simulator cannot do this, and then they have to be realized as multiple shots. That is the terminology. And you average over large number of shots to calculate expectation values. So there is a little bit of advantage in that. And the net result is that circuits with about 10 qubits and 100 logic operations can be realized on a laptop in a few minutes. That's quite convenient, because That's how the whole thing was developed. The undergraduates had their own laptops and they kept on playing with various routines till they worked right. And they didn't have to go to any workstation or even a large scale computer system to check out their ideas. The advantage of larger workstations or dedicated computers is limited for the reason that the Hilbert space grows exponentially with the number of qubits in the simulator. That is the penalty of having a classical system simulate a quantum one. Real quantum design will not be facing this exponential growth problem. And because of that, you can do 10 qubits on a laptop. You have a dedicated computers, you will be able to do up to 15 to 20 qubits, not more than that. And maybe instead of 100 operations, 1,000 operations. So the size of the system, which can be handled by these software simulators, is limited, but still it is good enough to check out various ideas. So now let me go back into some details about what all features we built in. The first thing I already said that density matrix is written in the Pauli basis, and there are 4 raised to n different coefficients. Here I have put in all the normalization properly, and the nice thing at the density matrix language is the normalization trace rho equal to 1 just fixes one of the coefficients. And so you can leave that thing out, and there is no constraint left of normalization on any of the other coefficients. There is a different constraint that the state is bounded in the sense that the pure states are boundaries of a mixed state convex region, and that constraint implies that the square of all these coefficients cannot exceed certain value. But beyond that, everything which is allowed, positive or negative, inside the convex region, which you can imagine as a sphere, is perfectly okay. We can write the operator that we want to measure at the end in the same Pauli basis. And again, it will be described by some coefficients, which are all real numbers. The operator is a Hermitian object, and then all the expectation values that we want to calculate basically become dot products of the coefficient of the density matrix and the coefficient of the operator. If you want to compare two density matrices, that is also straightforward, and it just becomes the Euclidean distance between the two sets of variables, AI and BI. Nothing more complicated than that, because all this Pauli matrices square to identity, and on top of that, they form a orthonormal set. Those are the two nice properties in which everything works. Okay, so what is the most general evolution that we programmed? And that essentially comes down to describing the evolution of a quantum system in terms of the super operator, or equivalently the Krauss operator sum representation. It says that the density matrix rho will change to mu rho mu dagger, where there can be multiple possibilities of these matrices. And the normalization is that the sum over mu of mu dagger m equal to identity. And this is the most general quantum evolution. Note that unitary evolution, which just corresponds to u rho u dagger, and projective measurements, which correspond to pk rho pk summed over k, where pk's are all projection operators that add up to identity. They are both special instances of this generic Krauss operator sum representation. So we don't have to worry about treating unitary operators and projection operators separately. They are both included in it as long as you find out a generic description in terms of these Krauss matrices for any process, and all the errors can also be written in this same language. The Krauss operator sum representation is not unique. You can describe the same process by different choices of the operators, but as long as you do it correctly with one operator, it is as good as another set. The final result is going to be identical. So now let me explicitly give the list of operations that we included. The first step was just initialization, and we had to find states which can be initialized efficiently, because there are 4 raised to n coefficients, and if you are going to initialize all of them one by one, it's going to take large time. So you want to use again the tensor product structure, and it is easy to initialize any strings of zeros and ones as a tensor product of identity plus sigma 3 and identity minus sigma 3. There are also useful states like uniform superposition state. It can be just created by identity plus sigma 1 raised to the power n. What about logic gates? Well, here we have to make a choice. And we chose to go with the textbook descriptions, where the standard operations are 1 qubit rotation and 2 qubit control knot. And 1 qubit rotations can further be simplified for ease of implementation, both in the software as well as the real quantum hardware, by decomposing them into a convenient basis where the rotation axis, they remain fixed, and the parameters are the angles of rotation. So this, for example, is satisfied by the Euler decomposition, a very well-known identity, where you can write a generic rotation as product of 3 rotations, one about RZ, z-axis, another RY, y-axis, and then another Z, RZ operation. And any 2 by 2 matrix, unitary 2 by 2 matrix, can be factorized in this particular way. And after that, you just have to apply various rotation pulses and implement them as operation on the density matrix. And 2 qubit control knot happens to be a convenient choice. There are other 2 qubit gates also, which people use. We programmed some of them, but it's actually now the job of the compiler to take a high level instruction and break it down into these elementary operations. when you have a quantum computer, this kind of compilation will be done by a classical computer. So you have to be able to write a good classical compiler for a quantum program as well, because it's only the elementary instructions which will get connected to the hardware, and whatever other schemes are used, we use a classical compiler to figure out the what are called assembly level instructions, and on top of that we assume that this is done all at a classical level. We have a foolproof method to do that. So the decomposition of high level instruction into these elementary gates, it's assumed to be error free. Errors can occur only when implementing this simple instruction on the hardware. Okay. What about measurements? There are various possibilities of measurement allowed by quantum theory, but we stuck to the simplest choice, which is projective measurement. And there the prescription is simple, that if you measure kth qubit along some direction n, then the component along the direction n survives, and the components orthogonal to direction n disappear. This is easily implemented in the Pauli basis because of the nice orthogonality property of the elementary basis units, the tensor product of Pauli matrices. And so we implemented a variety of options. One can perform a single qubit measurement, one can perform ensemble measurement, which is actually just each qubit measured separately, but the ensemble result can be combined into various types of expectation values by picking up suitable coefficients. It was also quite straightforward to include measurements in the Bell basis for arbitrary qubit pairs, because the Bell basis can be nicely written in terms of this Pauli matrices and density matrix description. The only term which survives are the two indices of the Pauli matrices are equal. When they are not equal, they do not correspond to the Bell states, and they get wiped out upon measurement. And we also added some simple enough erasure instruction where you want to set one particular qubit all the way to 0, you can do it by projection operation. Okay, so these are the kind of standard quantum operation. And now let me come to including various kind of noisy disturbances, which we thought of. And they occur again and again, various stages of the program. The first is initialization, where instead of the ground state, we have a thermal state. And the thermal state density matrix is quite well known. What we assumed is that all the noisy evolution is completely local, in the sense that the disturbances act, but they act on one qubit at a time. There is no global error which affects multiple qubits by the same transformation that we have included. So thermal error then becomes very simple. You just write a density matrix for a thermal distribution of a qubit and take it to the nth power. For the logic gate, we interpreted them as this rotation angles about specific directions. And if the implementation in this language, then the error will be uncertainty in the angle of rotations. So we assumed some distribution of the error around the desired value. So the mean can fluctuate a little, the variance can be non-zero, and we included both these parameters, the change in the mean for the angle and the change in the distribution or variation around the mean of the angle. And since they are all rotation operators, it just amounted to averaging cosine theta and sine theta over specific distributions. And the mean and the variance can be just included as two parameters which the user can provide. And that will define how much is the uncertainty in the rotation angles. We also interpreted the control knot operation in the same language, in the sense that it can be considered a transition selective pulse. And the error will then occur in the transition operators, which is sigma 1 in case of control knot. And we can replace sigma 1 by some fluctuation around sigma 1. And that also becomes a parameter with user sets in implementing this noisy simulator. Measurement, we included errors as a depolarization process. It's a simple generalization of the bit flip error, which occurs in classical computers, and depolarization is very easy to model in the density matrix language, because all you have to do is cut down the magnitude of the unit vector given the direction of the qubit, and instead of having a unit vector dotted with sigma, now you have something little less than a unit vector dotted with sigma, and that reduction is the depolarization parameter, again controlled by the user. And finally, the most important part, when we're not doing any operation, but the system deteriorates, there are two contributions. One is decay and another is decoherence. In the language of many quantum systems, these two are labeled by the time scales T1 and T2. T1 corresponds to decay and T2 corresponds to decoherence. So we had to model this. Again, it can be done very easily. And the parameters which are involved are these Boltzmann factors kind of structure. It describes the duration over time delta t divided by the T1 or T2 kind of parameters. If these factors are provided, you can easily program how the excited state, the state 1, will decay to the ground state 0, and also how the off-diagonal density matrix will decay in magnitude due to decoherence. And those are again some parameters. It saved us some effort in realizing that the processes of decay and decoherence actually commute. And so you can combine them in just one instruction. Change the magnitude of coefficient of sigma 1, sigma 2, and sigma 3 in a certain manner, according to parameters provided in terms of time constant T1 and T2. And this we did using the Trotter formula kind of approximation, in the sense that this process is going on continuously over the execution of the whole program. But the program is divided into clock steps, and each clock step is actually significantly smaller than the overall timescales of T1 and T2. So these factors for decay and decoherence are actually quite close to 1. And we just applied these factors at the end of every clock cycle to all the qubits after executing the instruction which belong to that particular clock cycle. So that is essentially all the processes which we implemented, and then we could see the effect of all the factors one by one. And this is a plot which exemplifies that. There are different curves corresponding to thermal error in initialization, depolarization error in measurement, rotation angles, error for instructions, and then the decoherence and decay errors present because of environmental interaction. And what we found was that the dominant damage was done by these decoherence and decay errors. That was expected because they are acting on all the qubits all the time, while the remaining errors act on some of the qubits some of the time. So that was fine, but a little bit surprise was the fact that the error due to decay actually dominated over the error due to decoherence, when T1 and T2 were sort of comparable. And that again gives a experimental criteria that when you are trying to make this system, don't worry about only decoherence, worry about decay of the states as well. It's an important parameter which should be controlled. Fine. So that is essentially all the description I have for the code. After that, one can make various statements about computational complexity. All the code uses is basically linear algebra, permutations, additions, and multiplications. Nothing beyond that. And on top of that, it's all linear algebra for real numbers. So we could choose various ready-made packages to deal with that, but there we immediately saw the cost of the linear algebra, that the storage required an array of size 4 raised to n. The logic gates required again 4 raised to n operations, even though the operations were local. In the simulator, this local operation become block diagonal matrices, and you still have to apply them over the whole array. Only thing is that local operations make the block diagonal structure, the size of the block, finite. 2 by 2 or 4 by 4, nothing more than that. The environmental noise, again, it was local, so it became block diagonal matrices, and that again required order 4 raised to n operation. The only thing which was not exponential in the number of qubits was measurement, because measurement in this language is just a lookup of specific values, nothing more than that. And if you have n qubits, you can extract n bits worth of information by just reading the corresponding entries, and that is a much simpler task. If you want to prepare the post measurement density matrix, that requires action of all the projection coefficients, and that does take Fourier-Swan operations. So that much about the complexity. And
hello, Purva.
yes,
Hello, Purva, can I ask a question?
Yes,
go
yes,
ahead.
please,
So,
please.
Actually, I had okay, I'm raising that. So I was asking a couple of questions. For example, you talked about decay and this effect of decay and decoherence producing different. No, decay had a stronger. So how do you here? What is the essential difference between the way you model decay and decoherence?
No, it is just a transformation of the
So that
density
is what is
matrices.
given in the literature. Right?
Decay is just modeled as the excited state 1 going down to excited ground state 0.
0 in the standard way.
So that's the standard amplitude decay of the process. What we added a little bit, that the decay was not toward the ground state, but it was towards the thermal state. So 1 will also go towards the thermal state and 0 will also go.
But decay to thermal state is also discussed, no? Because the literature.
Yeah, the operators will be different, but there are still certain kind of
yes, but that
operators.
is so that is what is well known. So here, what you have considered that modeling as well as the decoherence modeling together.
Yeah.
Is simulated. So that comparison and that decay is slower. Has it been noted earlier? Because decay multis models are standard models and decoherence also standard. So together, what you have considered together, decoherence and decay, is that the novel aspect of your study of this?
It's not a novel aspect.
But
it's just we have two parameters which are in some sense connected to T1 and T2 of the processes. And we could put those things as input parameters, user supplied parameters. Now the job was to look at what they do, and it turns out that these two processes are commute. So in the transformation, we only have to use the sum of the two parameters and not worry about the two values individually. It became something like that.
So this way of doing what really was
it's just
earlier,
writing the code.
Just it is writing the code. So there is nothing. So this observation should have been a standard observation, no? That decay is smaller. You say that you were surprised by this feature.
Well, we were.
What was the surprising aspect of it that I am trying to?
Results and decay, but that is actually consequence of the fact that in the real systems, T2 is generally much shorter than T1.
T2, that is what the decoherence.
The decoherence is much faster.
Faster.
But when we programmed it, we are just putting in some numbers. So when we kept T2 and T1 comparable, both these effects were also comparable. Okay, so that is like so that feature is not a generic feature, or it's not a so there is nothing particular special about it here. Well, if you can, I don't know whether you can read the numbers on the x-axis over here. With the scale we have plotted, the decay and decoherence curves are the lowest two curves. They are essentially on top of each other. But if you look at the factors which are on the x-axis scale, the decoherence, it is 1 part in 10 raised to 4. And decay factor is 1 part in 10 raised to 5.
And so that is because coming up the way you are adding them, putting them together.
Yeah, so what we found is a decay error of 1 part in 10 raised to 5 is essentially as important as decoherence error of 1 part in 10 raised to 4.
So it
This,
is- okay.
this numerical ordering, I had no idea, or I still have no idea about why it happens, but it happens.
But it is a characteristic of the way you implement those standards.
Yeah.
Just in
Depends
this
on the
context.
numbers, the way we have inserted
Yes,
them
because
into
this is,
our code.
so it is in this context you are observing.
Yeah.
And also, what do you mean by that phrase that these things are known? If you are using this phrase for those parameters, user known. This is the phrase you were using. Depolarization factor is known to user.
In the sense that this is a simulator.
So this
The
control.
user supplies the various noise parameter, how much
Oh,
noise
so it is under the control of the user.
So it can be tuned. You can do simulations with different values and see what happens.
So it depends upon the use.
Yeah. Okay, so I will continue. So the advantages of the density matrix in the poly basis I already mentioned that we had only real variables to take care of. We got the whole density matrix as output instead of doing individual runs and averaging. And the price was the amount of effort went up from 2 raised to 9 to 4 raised to 9. And in actual programming, we did use various standard systems and libraries available, both from Qiskit as well as the Python framework. So there are Jupyter notebooks and software linear algebra library called NumPy. They are available together with the compiler, the Python compiler, and we just used all of them. And that made the programming much easier because we could write all the programs in a high-level language. And these libraries actually are specific to the hardware. So as the hardware improves, the library can also be substituted. And that is just changing one instruction at the top of the program. You, instead of using NumPy, for example, a different library called JAX can be used. And JAX is a parallelized version of it, which is efficient on GPUs, the graphical processing unit. So it can speed up the actual execution of the program a lot, as long as the parallel structure works and all the linear algebra is designed to work in a hierarchy of loops, which can be very easily parallelized. So that is the structure of writing the code. And on top of that, we did a little bit of parallelization in the instruction level itself by dividing the code into parallel instructions, which can be executed simultaneously on different qubits. So we get to identify instructions which are kind of non-overlapping, and then they can be executed on the same clock step. And that will cut down the total execution time of the program. This was necessitated by the fact that the length of the program or the length of the clock cycles dictates the magnitude of the decay and decoherence error. So you want to minimize it. And so whatever logic instructions can be done in parallel. We wrote code that it can be done in that particular fashion. This will be needed for a real quantum system as well, because you will need to parallelize as many things as possible to cut down the disturbance to the quantum state, which is the result of decay and decoherence. But this again is somewhat dependent on the hardware architecture, about the connections and the geometry of the qubits, etc. And it may have to be tuned every time you adopt to a new hardware system. Okay. And now I go on to a different topic, which has nothing to do with the simulator, but it is something which we found a little bit later in this recent paper from Caltech, that there is a lot of advantage in using the polybasis operators. Not only they are nicely factorized in the tensor product structure and orthonormal, but they have another property, that they either commute or anti-commute, nothing in between. As a result, if you take 2 copies of the density matrix and perform a Bell type of measurement jointly on these 2 copies, all those Bell type of operators commute with each other. And that means that you can extract the magnitude squares of all the coefficients simultaneously, one shot. You need only 2 copies of the density matrix. And then what you want depends on the problem. If you are happy with the magnitude of the coefficients, the job ends here. If you want more details, then you need to find out the signs of these coefficients. And the signs are important only when the magnitude is large. If the magnitude is small, well, you can ignore those coefficients completely. So after this joint 2 density matrices measurement, you can do more. But there is yet another consequence which follows from the uncertainty principle, that not all the coefficients on the polybasis can be large. If one of them is large, the other one, which is a non-commuting operator with it, will become small. This is basically uncertainty principle showing up. You just have to write down the variances of expectation values of these operators combined with the fact that the square of operator is identity. And so there is a relation between the means. And so even the density matrices can be broken down into smaller sets. Some sets are important and some sets are not, depending on what magnitudes you found. And afterwards, there's a surprising result connected with the fact that to find the signs of this quotient, how much effort is required. So the signs are to be found only for the magnitudes which are away from 0. So you put a bound that I want only the magnitudes which are larger than some number. And the bound I have written here is epsilon. And then since it's going to be a probabilistic measurement, you say that this value I have determined is correct up to confidence 1 minus delta. And with this constraints of epsilon and delta, what you find is if you want to find m signs of these operators, tensor products of Pauli matrices, the requirement is log of m by delta divided by epsilon square. Remember, this m is inside the logarithm. You need so many copies of density matrices to determine all the signs. And if you plug in now the numbers, that will give a exponential advantage that the 4 raised to n Pauli observables can be determined up to a constant error with order n copies of the density matrices. If you want to use a classical method, that effort will be exponentially. This is a drastic change, but it happens to the spatial operators which appear in the Pauli basis. So this can be used even in generic tomography experiments for real quantum hardware. It has nothing to do with the simulator, but if you choose to express the density matrix in this Pauli basis, you can certainly do the tomography far more efficiently. You don't need exponential in n number of measurements, you only need order n measurements. So that was the last theoretical blurb on top of the simulator, which I described, and I will stop at this particular stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Apurva. That was a very comprehensive, very nice lecture. So the floor is now open for further questions. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I don't know. Are you going to, can you just speak? Or I think.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, please.
Professor Apurva, very nice talk. Thank you very much. So I think you, in the beginning itself, you clarified that you are talking about local noise, single qubit operators. So suppose we want to now introduce pairwise noise, like flip-flop terms, which also cause significant contribution to T1 decay. So how we can, how expensive it is? Is it very expensive, very difficult?
No, it is not. It's just like instead of doing 1 qubit measurement, you write the code for a Bell state measurement. You can easily write a code for a 2 qubit, whatever you want to call that process, some disturbance. And as long as the range of the noise is finite, it can be included without too much trouble. And afterwards, for larger systems, it is better to write it in a hierarchical fashion. Just like the complicated instructions, we broke it down to 1 qubit and 2 qubit operations. If you have a complicated disturbance, you ask the question, can it be broken down into some elementary operations, and then we apply those operations sequentially. It will again be generically true. It's kind of universality that just like arbitrary unitary operator, you can break it down to 1 and 2 qubit operations. That arbitrary noise also can be broken down into some 1 qubit and 2 qubit noise kind of instructions.
Further questions, comments?
Just
Sure.
a couple of this last slide you showed. So when you say, so the net requirement of the order of n copies comes essentially for the sign determination part, no? For the successive sign determination.
Yes.
Because if you ignore sign determination, then only the claim is how many measurements suffice. If you ignore sign determination part,
Yeah, if you just want the magnitude, 2 copies of the density matrix will be
matrix
enough.
suffice, 2 copies. Now for sign determination, the number requirement, that value you
Becomes order n, where n is the number of qubits.
now that net requirement to estimate that requirement, that depends upon that success rate. No? By what is the consideration that essentially determines this requirement of the computer?
Yeah, so this is a well-known property in computer science proofs. So there are so-called bounds, which are probabilities of tails of distributions. So there is a well-known Markov
Oh, okay, from
inequality, and there is also a union bound
those,
and things like that. So the important point here is that you don't want to determine sign for all variables. You only want to determine sign for variables which have magnitude larger than some non-zero value, some epsilon.
we have to put some cutoff and then
Yeah, you put a cutoff. And as long as epsilon is away from 0, which you can ensure by the first test, you measured all the magnitudes with 2 copies. And then you figured out that only these coefficients are important, the other ones can be ignored. And those which are larger than epsilon, now you can ask the question how many copies you need. And there is an epsilon square in the denominator, don't forget that. So the closer that epsilon goes to 0, the number of effort goes up. But it does not depend exponentially in the number of operators that you measure.
it is in that sense it is advantageous compared.
Yeah.
And so about the simulator, you said, so there you essentially used all the standard ingredients, but then the context in which you applied, that what makes it especially interesting, or what was the, what did you summarize to be the significant feature of it, that simulator? Because
the simulator is now just a code. You can treat it as a library.
Right.
You are not going to do anything with it. You only use it to test some models. Write some circuit.
Determine upon it will determine on the context.
You write some circuit and you say that these
and
are
you
the
have
noise
some criteria
parameters.
for the kind of systems for which it will be particularly useful compared to the simulators that are already available. Means what kind of applications this will be advantageous compared to the usual simulators.
Yeah, so most of the simulators which are available in IBM or Google or Amazon, they all have their own versions. They are written in the state vector language. So they don't have the capability to include noise. So you get sort of ideal results, and then you have to compare it with the hardware that they provide, and the result will match up to some level. Right? You can do so many gates. After that, the answer will be unrecognizable. So here we can see the deterioration as we put in the imperfection on all the gates by hand. And that facility is not in the public domain as far as these big companies are concerned. They might have some versions now available, but most of this kind of facility they keep hidden.
Apurva,
because they are actually
Apurva, sorry, but
using
Qiskit
them
actually
their
does have,
devices.
sorry Apurva, but Qiskit actually does have noise models.
Yeah, so Qiskit has all the literature on the noise model, and it does modeling, but what it does, it takes the state vector psi, calculates the outer product to construct the density matrix, and then does the operations on that density matrix. This will give the generic result, no doubt about it. But it is not as efficient in terms of doing all these things from scratch throughout, and also using the Pauli basis.
So have you done a comparison between Qiskit's performance and your, because from what you had said in the beginning that this is the backend to Qiskit, right? So that is the part I'm trying to still grasp. So is it something which is independent of Qiskit, because then it's not its backend?
No, it's not independent of Qiskit.
It's not, right? Yeah. So then the question is that, if it is actually a backend to Qiskit, and Qiskit has its own noise model. So this thing that you mentioned, which one understands is the difference between the state vector formalism and the density matrix one. That is the one where, you have actually simulated the models following the density matrix approach. And you have explained, during the talk, the merits and where, the demerits might be in terms of time and all that. So is that, is that what is the fundamental difference between the noise models in Qiskit and the noise models in QSIM?
Yeah, I don't know what all noise models Qiskit has included. They definitely have some of the important ones which we counted, but the implementation may be a little different.
Right.
On top of that, when we did our work, the density matrix formalism was not there in Qiskit.
Yeah, that is
added a little later.
Later, okay. I think somebody has raised.
This is all open source, and there is no privilege that I did it first or somebody else did not have the right ideas. It is open source. We share everything which we have. And ideas go back and forth. They will also tune their code, and we can tune our code to pick up various tricks which are realized one by one. That is fine.
So Siman Raj has raised hand.
I would just like to point out that, so both Qiskit and some other companies also, they have their own noise models, and there are differences in how they implement them. For example, I have been using this, quantum computer by Rigetti, it's a company. And for example, it has its own way of implementing, let's say, amplitude damping. So what they do is, so they have this facility to actually design your own gate based on whatever density, whatever operator you provide to it, right? So it will make it into a gate. Same thing can be done with Qiskit also. And for example, for amplitude damping, what Rigetti does is, it says that you provide the amplitude damping matrix and we'll add it to the identity matrix. So now, wherever you want an amplitude damping, you just provide that, you just put that, let's say, noisy identity operator there, and then it will simulate. It will simulate amplitude damping that way. So yeah, there are various ways in which they do it. Now, I don't know about the efficiency. For that, we need to compare and see how efficient each of the way is. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
No, there are various things in various settings which are specific to the hardware. That also goes without saying, because different hardware have different kind of instabilities, and they will decide which particular kind of error is more important and which one is not so important. And they try to model the important errors as accurately as they can. We have just stuck to the general formalism, which is basically available in all textbooks about what are the kind of errors that occur, and we included it. If you want to find out some more complicated errors, well, you have to be more specific, and certainly the code can be written and those kind of new routines can be added to the structure. It is all open source, and it is for that reason available to the users to tinker with as they wish.
So Chintan, raised hand.
Mahesh here again. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
What can I say?
I'm logged in from my son's account. Okay. Other question is in the standard tomography scheme, ancillary qubits in known states are known to scale down the complexity of tomography. Do you think similar advantage ancillary qubits can bring in quantum tomography scheme?
Ancillary qubits also undergo all environmental disturbances. So if you have to use them as some intermediate steps, they will of course deteriorate the signal. That is perfectly fine. And if you want to then find out the total error, well, you have to include extra parameters. How the
Suppose you reset ancillary qubits at the end of the computation.
Yeah, so you can reset it, but even when they are being used, they will undergo some errors and that error will feed back into the original system. You have to take into account that.
Okay. Thanks.
Nice. So if there are no further questions, comments, last chance. Okay. So I think we are good for now, Purva. So thanks a lot for your time and for the very nice seminar. So see you then. We will end this recording now.